Great. Well, I'm going to start just by sharing my screen and then we'll get Martin on. So I found a picture of you, Brian. Just found it on my computer. I typed biochar in and that's what came up. Just a bit of background, everyone. This is a project where Brian and I started working together. It's a bit of a Mad Max creation, but we called it Terrence to Terrapreta Trailer, Carbon Negative Biomass Power Station, Traveling Teapot and Field Kitchen. Um, and it's just a little way of taking it to events and showcasing what you can do with burning wood to charcoal, which is, I've shared the sort of the inspiration of this event and all things biochar. Really, the idea that like there is no such thing as waste. Everything is a nutrient for the soil, and all of this surplus material, tons of woody biomass, can be turned into carbon, like stable soil carbon, the ultimate sort of sponge for the earth, to help reverse the destruction of our hydrological cycles, right? So yeah, and restabilize the nutrient cycles of the earth. So yeah, this was I thought I'd actually quote the Lovelock sign that we used to take around with us. James Lovelock, who passed away, of course, just last year, said there is one way we could save ourselves from global heating, and that is through the massive burial of charcoal. It would mean farmers turning all of their agricultural waste containing char that plants have spent their lives sequestering into non-biodegradable charcoal and burying it in the soil. This scheme would need no subsidy. The farmers would make a profit. So, my goodness, whilst we're waiting for everyone to join, has anyone read this book yet by called Soil by Matthew Evans? I wanted to share a couple of things I got from this book today, which just seems super relevant doing this evening. One of the statements is that since humans have since the human population has increased these last 100 years to the state it is, we have lost at least half of the world's plant biomass. Half of the world's plant biomass. It's also saying that we are currently losing 2.5 tons of topsoil per person per year, which could be more like 10 tons. And that this is the equivalent, one study means that this is the equivalent of 9 kilograms of topsoil being lost every meal that we eat, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So I wanted to put that out there because obviously that's what we've got to change. And I think this technology and working with fungi and working with these microbes and soil food web is our best chance of being capable of doing that. And then biochar is this incredible tool that can help us, both carry those biology back to the soil and store that carbon, create that sponge to work with all the other elements and minerals in the cycle to restore the soil. Because it's the one hopeful thing we have is that we can now build soil faster than ever with an understanding and an appreciation of these processes. A lot of us were some of us were at the Oxford Farming Conference recently, and some of the rivers and streets in Oxford look very much like this picture in the middle. We can see our topsoil in our rivers, and it's washing away into the sea. And the worst thing for the plant biomass point on that is that then that is contaminating, that is preventing the growth of healthy ecosystems in the coastlines. That, for example, the kelp forests are being affected by all of this runoff, swamped. There's low oxygen zones as a result of the nitrogen washing off the fields, and all of this can be fixed by making the soil back into a sponge, which charcoal and microbiology can accelerate. So that's some of the motivation. I just wanted to share about just to remind people that co-composting that came up so brilliantly with Sylvia and the Earthly guys in the last talk. Sylvia was advocating that we all do co-composting with biochar, using up to 50% biochar in the composting process. And I wanted to put out there that it's the best thing to have on hand if you want to run a compost loo, for example, for any kind of small holding or event. We always used to have the urine separator on our compost loo run off dry biochar, and then I simply hot composted it afterwards, and that seemed to give really good results. Yeah, it can be made in loads of ways. I'm really excited to introduce Martijn in a minute, who has just done some of the most inventive stove innovation I've seen, and this is the sort of yeah, these are some of the cool, like, just shows you how much energy is in this wood, and how actually when you burn it super cleanly without any smoke, you get this amazing material as a byproduct. Brian was the person to show me that Pi invented this wooden grate, as far as I'm concerned, using wood to hold in the wood, and then the wood burns down and burns through the wood, and then it all turns into a pile of charcoal. And it's just genius the way that top lit updraft technology sort of happens. These are some of the stack burners that we called them after getting inspired by Brian, that we've done around the place. You can do them straight in the earth, and there's enough oxygen flowing up out of the earth, almost, going down into the, because cold air is rising and it's feeding the fire, and it looks like you're making a flamethrower in the earth. That's also really useful for cooking on, like heating water. And then finally, biochar is the ultimate partner with fungi, which are the best allies for storing the soil carbon and recreating that soil carbon sponge. This is from Caroline's talk yesterday, the results of her growing in small basis project with Plymouth University. And this is an amazing picture from their lab of the fungal hyphae networks that have colonized their biochar. So yeah, that was it. I believe there's I also wanted to advocate that we could in the future of this composting network and project, add biochar to our compost and use it for preserving the compost in a way, or making it more, because the challenge is selling something that's 50% moisture and really wet and live is quite challenging. So I found adding biochar to the bags, to sort of dried biochar and then 50% compost. I was actually using about 20% biochar, 80% compost, helped to sort of take that moisture away and made the bags, the nice compostable packaging, last longer. And this is just one way of the millions of uses of biochar's various properties, but just a little insight there. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Martijn, who has prepared his first presentation for us. And yeah, I'd love, yeah, over to you, mate. I'm going to host you now and can't wait to see what you've got to show us.
Thank you very much for the lovely introduction. Let me share the screen. Do you guys all see it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into it then. So my name is Martijn Jager. I'm originally from the Netherlands. And about 11 years ago, I had the opportunity to move to Portugal. So the presentation outline, first I'm going to tell why I got into biochar. Then I'm going to show you about my journey with low budget stove building and biochar production. Then I'm going to show you the development of my indoor biochar production system. Then some conclusions that I came to from nearly a decade of making biochar and stove development. Some ways how to use biochar. And I'm going to tell you about our products and services that we offer as a business. Plus, I'm gonna round it up with some current developments and goals for the coming year. So, why I got into biochar? So here in Portugal, it's a Mediterranean dry climate. So that means that for at least half a year, we typically do not get any precipitation. And then we have in winter, we have a couple periods that we do get lots of rain. Because of this dry weather, it's very challenging to compost the woody biomass, because you have to keep it moist. If it dries out, it just doesn't break down. And because of the climate, it's very important that the soil actually is able to hold moisture. And currently, in most places, there's virtually no soil organic carbon, which you can see in these following pictures. This was me digging some swales to try and capture that winter rain and allow it to infiltrate in the soil. And as you can see on the picture on the right, it's a very thin layer of clay sitting on top of limestone. And there's no organic material at all on top of the soil. Like that whole soil horizon is not there. So what most people do with their woody biomass is they just burn it, because otherwise, if you don't burn it and you don't shred it with a chipper, it's just gonna stay like that, like a pile you see here in the foreground. If you don't touch it, it would stay there for 10, 20 years, and it doesn't break down at all. So in the wet season, so from autumn till spring, you see all these massive white plumes of smoke everywhere. And that's people burning their olive tree prunings, the almond tree prunings, and all their woody biomass. So here is a picture of me on that exact same day where my neighbor was burning. You can see the plume of smoke here in the picture on the left. And with me with the flame cap kiln, wasn't making any smoke. On the pictures on the right, I have the arrows pointed roughly to where my kiln is. And you can see there's no smoke at all. And most of my neighbors would not even know that I was burning anything, because there's no smoke and there's also no smell when you burn biomass down to biochar in a flame cap kiln. But this is a picture is already further along my journey. And I first started with top lit updraft kiln. The very basic system was just a bucket with another bucket on top that was holding the chimney. And as you can see, this is my first burn. I quenched it a bit too early because there's still some unburned almond shells there visible. This system I did not use very long because it was a bit hazardous to remove the top bucket and the chimney to be able to quench the material. I actually ended up with a 3rd-degree burn on my arm because the almost glowing red flue pipe was touching my arm when I was removing it at the end of the burn. So I was quickly looking for a better solution. Then I came across a stainless steel cylinder from a soda keg, which I then I made a contraption with two paint buckets, 15-liter buckets, to make a more manageable flame or teeler gasifier. At first, just the gasifier itself, and then quickly I put a pot stand to be able to cook and heat water and make some use of the process energy. Then I wasn't really satisfied with the amount of biochar that produced. So I was experimenting with some bigger teelet systems. There's a 25-liter bucket inside a 60-liter drum, again with a small flue on top. And that progressed into trying to make a retort that was fed by a rocket stove. But here, one of my main issues was that I wasn't happy that I was burning biomass down to ash just for the sake of creating biochar from other biomass, because I felt I was losing out on potential biochar. And also there was a bit of an issue with some gas leakage at the top. And it was a hassle because I had to remove the retort because the opening was on the bottom. It took a long time to feed it. And so I was not super keen on that. Then I tried putting that same retort on top of the previous teelet stove. But that was a bit of a logistical issue at the end of the teelet burn. I had to remove the retort and to be able to the teelet. So that also was quite short-lived. Then I made a larger teelet with a 60-liter drum, which worked quite well, But the issue with this one, I had already come to the conclusion that if you quench the tealot with water directly inside the system, it severely reduces the lifespan of your steel buckets. So I was tipping this over, and of course with the size of this, it was also a bit on the dangerous side. So this was also not very long lived. And then luckily on one of my, I was going to see some friends from about 15 kilometers away. And on my way, as I was cycling there, I found a plastic container, like was a pool filter housing, like a sand filter. I found it at a bin, so I had already set it aside to pick it up on my way back. So I showed my friends a picture of that sand filter, and one of them asked, "Is it metal?" I said, "No, I wish." So on my way home from visiting my friends, not far from leaving their place, I actually found this container that someone had put out at the side of the bin. So I dragged it home on my bicycle, and I had to walk because it was a bit too heavy on the back. But I managed to get it home, and I turned that into my next tealot gasifier.
Right.
And to get rid of the issue of having to tip it out into a bath of water, I decided to put a door at the bottom, so that when it was time to quench, I could just pull a pin and let it all drop in this bath here at the bottom. And this worked quite well, but with tealots this size, and actually I'm not entirely sure how big this one was. I think it was maybe 80 liters. But as you can see in the next pictures, here's a picture series of the whole burn, and pictures taken every so many minutes. At the 20-minute mark, you can already see that the flames are reaching the bottom, while the actual flame front is still about halfway up at the kiln. Because if you put chunky biomass inside the tealot, things start to fall through the cracks and the burn gets a bit uneven. And this is actually also an issue I've seen lots of people have with the barrel retort system, that the burn can become quite uneven and there's burning biomass falling further down. And that creates a situation where there's too much biomass off-gassing, which then means that there's not enough oxygen being able to mix with the smoke to achieve a clean combustion. And one issue with this system I was having is that the secondary combustion, this big flame, was also going off quite often. So I had to keep a burning stick there to make sure that it stayed lit. But all in all, it worked quite well, and it was quite a lot of fun to run this gasifier. And especially at the end of the burn, to then pull the pin and have all the embers fall out and quench into that bath. And so I went from a very big gasifier, then I was thinking, oh, I've gone big, and I didn't want to go any bigger. So I thought, let's see how small I can go. So I built a very small gasifier from a thermos flask that was 50 centiliters, half a liter. And because of this small size, I was restricted to the use of stove pellets, because any other fuel just doesn't have the energy density to make use of the fire. And because the stove pellets are quite dense, there was also the necessity for a small ventilator to make sure that there was enough oxygen for a clean combustion. And then this is the same drum that I used earlier with the 60-liter retort on the inside, or the 60-liter tealot. And I decided to use this as a tealot on its own. And because it has air holes on the bottom, it's not necessary for this method to have like a cone shape, such as with the pit burn method. Because if you leave the primary air holes open at the beginning of the burn, there's enough air going in to create a clean combustion. And then as the burn progresses and as the barrel fills up with embers, I then close down the bottom air supply, And I just kept feeding it on the top as if it was a flame cap kiln until the barrel was completely full, and at which point you can quench it with water, or alternatively, you can put a lid on top if you have a barrel that has a lid with a clamp. I have to say that personally, I prefer to water quench because I think it gives a better quality char. And you don't have the risk of opening things too soon, which can happen if you put a lid on it and you open it while it's still a bit hot, then it can just start smoldering again.
So cool, Martin. What would you call that design? That's a retort that you turned into a flame cap. Is that right?
Well, it is. I started out as a tealot because I filled it completely with biomass and I lit it from the top. But then at like when it's halfway full, or about 2/3 full with embers, I close the bottom, at which point it becomes a flame cap kiln, basically.
Okay. Tealot to flame cap. Thank you.
Exactly. But like you have to have the primary air holes open at the beginning, because if a flame cap kiln has vertical sides, then there's just not enough oxygen reaching the actual fire for it to properly carbonize. So it really helps to have those air holes, or unless you can start higher up with the fire, then that would also work. So I saw Brian put a post with a metal grate in the bottom. And I guess that also is a way to make sure that there's still enough oxygen at the beginning stage of the fire. Because if you would try and light a fire on the bottom of a barrel, it gets a bit more difficult.
Thanks.
So here I have another small tealot gasifier, which it worked, but it still wasn't burning as clean as I had hoped it would be. And I made some adjustments. This was mainly running on almond shells. And then I later added a ventilator. This is a completely different stove. It's not. I did not modify the first one, but I made a new one with a single primary and secondary air opening instead of holes all the way around. And the opening at the top I enlarged as well. And this I use for quite a bit for some small cooking, stuff like that. And then in January 2017, I made my first experiment with the pit burn method, because I had quite a bit of scrap pellet wood from raised bed gardens that didn't really work in this climate, because every time I was trying to water it, the water would just run off the sides because it was creeping into all the gaps in the wood. So I had a lot of that wood to get rid of. So I dug myself a pit, and I used that method instead. I instantly loved it because it's such a productive method, and it's so time efficient. You don't have to cut things up and put it into a large tealot. Just you can cut things up as you go. This was a rather small hole, which I then later moved elsewhere and enlarged. So I used the pit burn method I used for quite some years. And then at a certain point, I had this large, this is a hot water tank, a solar hot water tank. And I made a proper flame cap kiln above the ground. And as soon as I used it the first time, my first thought was, why did I not do this much sooner? Because the convenience of having a flame cap kiln above the ground compared to a pit burn is enormous, because you can escape from a lot of the heat. With a pit in the ground, you have all that heat directly in your face. Whereas with a kiln, you can, if you approach the kiln from a bit lower, you're shielded by the sides of the kiln. They're much more convenient to use. This one had a slight downside that it was way too big. It was quite large, so I always ended up with, like, the embers would accumulate in the center, and then I'd have to shovel them to the sides. And it was too much to keep feeding, and it was very hard work to keep up with that large flame front. But flame cap kilns, it's the size of the opening on the top that determines how much biomass you have to keep adding all the time. So the bigger that is, the quicker you have to run with keeping up with it. Especially if you feed it with very twiggy and thin branches, which is my preferred feedstock, because the thinner the branches are, the hotter the fire will burn. So this is a second flame cap kiln I built, which was a lot smaller, about 200 liters, and also much more portable, which then made it possible for me to start doing burns at other people's places as well. So what I found is very helpful when starting a fire in a flame cap kiln is to create like a grid about halfway up the kiln and light the fire on top of that to also allow a lot of oxygen flow at the beginning of the fire, because then it seems to get going much quicker, and there's less risk of being left with lots of unburned embers at the bottom of your kiln, which can happen if you start the fire directly on the bottom. And then I made a small stainless steel version of this, of the pyramid kiln, to be able to do workshops and take it with me on the bicycle or in the train, just purely for portability. And of course, in terms of biochar production, it becomes less efficient because it still takes about 2 hours to fill this one up. But it's nice for like small campfires and evenings with friends, for example. And then in March, I decided to cut up that massive flame cap kiln because it was just too big, and use that top panel to create a smaller flame cap kiln that was still portable, but not too big and easy to manage by myself to manage the fire. And then eventually the two ends of that large one, I made another small kiln, just because I had it laying around. Then I started making some other flame cap kilns, different sizes, also to be able to sell to people that wanted to have their own flame cap kiln. There's one 70 by 70 centimeters at the top, and it's 80 liters.
So cool.
And then this is my latest kiln, because the previous one I sold, and then I had to quickly build another one, which was then this one. And this is the kiln I'm currently using, which was 360 liters. Which is it's a very convenient size. And indoor biochar production. So I started this at the same time while I was still developing the outdoor systems as well. And because I was realizing there was so much heat being produced with those steel gasifiers, that it seemed like a waste to not find a way to actually use that to heat the house in winter. The winters can get a bit chilly here in Portugal. So I thought, let's find a way to combine this with an indoor system to make use of all that heat. So I made this massive cob structure in the corner of my house. And at the beginning, it's using the same 20-liter cylinder that I was using at the very beginning. And in the beginning, I was lifting it in via the top. I was quenching it. Actually, I'm not sure how I think I was trying to shut off the oxygen supply, which did work, but then to empty the cylinder, it was a hassle. So I put a door in place to be able to move the cylinder in and out and take the cylinder outside for quenching. An issue I had with this whole system is that even though it produced a lot of heat from the cylinder, the cob mass was just way too big, and it took multiple consecutive burns for it to start warming up enough to actually start radiating heat into the house. And in between, I made a small biochar tube inspired by the Biocharlie, which is basically a piece of stovepipe that you can put inside of a conventional wood stove. like a little record. So you can get some biochar production out of a normal wood stove. And I made this from a stovepipe that I cut roughly in 1/3 or 25% and 75%. Then I hammered the ends flat, so it was all sealed, and I could still open and close it. This one was a bit too big, so then I made a smaller one, which was just a stainless steel can from a Chinese shop. And something to note with these, I think it's very important that if you make one of these, it's best to find a stainless steel container that just slides, that the lid just slides on top instead of screwing. Because if for whatever reason the holes get blocked and they don't ventilate the gases out properly, you want it to be able to just pop open and not build up any pressure. Because that's the last thing you want inside of a wood stove, of course. So this is my second indoor stove. Because the previous one was not giving enough radiant heat into the space, I figured, well, let's make one from metal. Then going to have more radiant heat. And that worked great, except it gave way too much heat. This house was a very small house. So it got way too hot, like 35 degrees, quickly after lighting the stove. And as soon as the stove went out, all the heat would also be gone as well, because there was no heat retention there. This one I was using a 12-liter cylinder, another gas container. And I have there the nuts and bolts on the outside, because that gave me, I made a handle to be able to lift it in and out of the system, which was a little bit, was not the most convenient, but it worked. Then the next winter, I had already removed the metal stove because it just gave too much heat and wasn't comfortable enough. So I put a metal barrel on top of the old system to get more radiant heat out of it and get a better heating for the space. Then after that, I made a large masonry system, which was still using the 20-liter T-LUT. And this one was, I would say, was working perfectly, because it had both a lot of direct radiant heat from the steel top, and the brick skin was light enough to start radiating heat after about an hour or so, but still had enough thermal mass to retain the heat after the stove was already out. So this would stay warm almost until the morning if I was lighting it at night a couple of times. But that was super convenient. And I was even cooking some pizza still on the cooktop on top there with a ceramic pot that I put on top of there. But still the big issue with this system and the 20-liter cylinder is that to quench it, I was taking the cylinder outside the house and then quenching it in a bucket, which was fine for me, but it's not something that other people would do inside their house, because there was like some bits of embers falling out from the bottom, and it wasn't the safest of situations, but it definitely worked and it kept me very warm in the winter. Then I made a large metal version, which technically is an indoor version, but I'd never used it indoors. But it could be used indoors as well. This is just the beginning of 2020. And here I put a small water distillation system on top. This was like early days of COVID, and we didn't know what was going to happen, and if the supermarkets would still be supplied with everything. So I wanted to have a way to at least have some clean, purified water for myself. That's why I made a small water distillation system on top of the T-LUT. And then at a certain point, I realized that the small T-LUT gasifier I had was actually burned the most clean. So I went back to small, and this time with a 1.3-liter thermos flask. And then I turned that also into an indoor stove. So this is in the same location where I had the large masonry system, the first indoor system, which I started demolishing, and I put a small metal version with this 1.3 liter tillet gasifier there. And then I actually made a couple of extra cylinders also in 1 liter. So I could regulate the temperature on the cook plate based on which gasifier I was using. For example, if I was cooking like a soup, I would start it with the 1.3 liter gasifier, which would bring the water to a boil. Then when that was finished, after an hour or so, I would switch it to the 1 liter gasifier to maintain like a soft rolling boil. So I could do like a soup that was boiling for a couple of hours. And that gave me some flexibility with the heat output. And then I made a base with 3 of the 1 liter tillet gasifiers. And as you can see on the bottom right picture, the picture is a bit vague, but it reads 492 degrees Celsius. This is a cast iron sewer lid of 1/2 inch. So that got incredibly hot with just 3 of those little burners. And then to test things even further, I made a small hot water heat exchanger to be able to take hot baths directly cooled with the gasifier, and or heated with the gasifier. And it takes less than 2 kilos of wood, and that's enough to get a hot bath of water. So that shows how efficient the system works. And actually, on top of the heat exchanger, I can put my hand when it's running, because the heat exchanger is so efficient at pulling all the heat from the gasifiers. And then this is the vinyl version of the gasifier that I made also. I made stove plans of available. This was in November 2021. After I had used the previous system for about a year to make sure that it was convenient to use, and it was working as I wanted it to work. 1.3 liter burner. It runs on 800 grams of stove pellets. Gives about 15 grams of biochar. Takes about 55 to 70 minutes to burn. And this is very dependent on the atmospheric conditions. Like on some days, like 55 minutes is the average time. But some days when the air pressure is a bit different, then the burn can take a lot longer. So the heat output is roughly 1800 watts. There's a 50 by 50 centimeter triangular base. The cooktop has a height of 87 centimeters, which is quite convenient. And it uses 80 millimeter flue pipes, which are widely available. It's the same type of flue that conventional pellet stoves are using.
Amazing. And you've made a plan, you've open sourced the plans for that, Marty, you're selling the plan.
I'm selling the plans on my website, yes.
Great.
And then this September, we picked a huge amount of prickly pears. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with them. It's a cactus fruit. And those cactuses, they just grow wild here in many places. They produce a huge amount of fruits, which are quite sweet, but they have a large amount of seeds, so they're not very convenient to eat as it is. But to make jam is perfect. So because I knew I was going to be making that jam, I made another tillet gasifier system where I have the pot submerged into the bell to get a more efficient heat exchange there. So the pot is also heated from the sides. So we made about 7 kilograms of jam, and we used, here I cannot see actually, no wait, yeah. So this is the amount of biochar that we produced, with both sterilizing the jars for the jam and boiling the jam itself. So we only did, I think, we did 2 burns, I think. So that's, and then it would seem like a very small amount of biochar, and that's a bit the downside of this tillet gasifier. It burns so efficient and uses so little stove pellets that of course the biochar output is also quite small. Of course, it's much better than burning gas where there's no biochar production at all. And I also made a small pizza oven that uses my 2 of the 1 liter Kiln gasifiers. This is a product I had made already many previous attempts at this, but there was always issues. Either I had too much top heat or too much bottom heat. It was not easy to find the right balance between having a good heat distribution in the oven. But I think I finally cracked that. So now we have delicious Italian pizzas that you can cook at home using a carbon negative pizza oven.
Right. Could you share the design of that? How's the top working? Is that, are they the flues coming out the top, or
yeah, there's 2 flues coming out the top, so the flames go in on the bottom.
Mm.
Then the flame travels under a steel plate towards the back.
Mm.
And then it circles back over the top of the pizza to get all that heat from the top. And then the gas goes out on the top again. So theoretically, this could also be put inside the house if the flue was connected to going outside. And this system I have not made is not available, but I might add it to the gasifier plants at some point as well. Which if I do add that, then everyone that has bought the plant previously, they will be able to also access the updates. So some conclusions. So in my opinion, the flame cap kilns and pit burns are the most efficient way to produce large quantities of biochar, because there's the least amount of feedstock preparation. You can scale it up however big you want, up to a certain degree, of course, because too big becomes too challenging to keep up with feeding a fire. But it's such a no-brainer, and all you need really is a shovel and some soil, basically, to just dig a hole and you can get started. So which size that is most suitable really depends on your specific context and available feedstock. So if you have a lot of, let's say, bamboo or straight coppice poles, then you might benefit more from a longer trough type thing. Or if you have fruit tree prunings that are a bit shorter and maybe a bit wider as well, then you might benefit more from a square or a round-sized kiln. Then, in my opinion, the Kiln gasifiers are the most suitable system if you want to use the process energy, because they're so contained, and especially if you're using stove pellets, they're very predictable. Like when you light a Kiln gasifier filled with stove pellets, you know it's going to burn for this many minutes, and you could even walk away and then come back just before it's about to be finished. And it's a very consistent heat output, which for most heat applications, it's important that you know that the output is going to be consistent. Then in my experience, the small size Kilns burn a lot cleaner than the larger ones. For example, with the 20-liter system, I was doing some cooking as well, and there was quite a large amount of soot built up on the bottom of my pots, which with the small size Kilns, I have no issues with soot building up because they burn so clean. Sometimes I've even used them to dry my hair, which may sound a bit crazy since I don't have much hair at the moment. So once I did, and I was just drying it above the flames of the Kiln gasifiers. And they burn so clean, you cannot smell that they're burning. Like the only thing you're smelling is just the smell of hot air, much like a hair blower or something like that. Then, in my opinion, retorts only make sense if you are condensing byproducts like wood vinegar or wood tar, or in case you put a small retort inside a wood stove to be able to get some biochar out of that. And I would really recommend people to not waste their time the 55 and 30 gallon barrel in barrel system, because that system is inefficient by design. Because if you have to burn 25 gallons worth of biomass down to ashes just to pyrolyze 30 gallons of biomass, then you're already starting out a couple steps behind. And the method also, it takes quite a while to set up if you wanted to burn properly and evenly. So I really recommend people to skip that step in their biochar development and go straight for flame cap kilns, because they're much more efficient, in my opinion. Then I'd like to say some things about how to use biochar. I've noticed that a lot of people come across the issue of crushing, which seems to be a bigger obstacle than the actual making of the biochar. So the big question is then, do you even need to crush it or not? There's a couple of ways to use biochar without having to crush it. So what you would do after making a biochar, you just run it through a screen to get rid of all the fine material, which is essentially already crushed. And then the larger chunks you can use, for example, in a drainage layer, in water filtration systems, in water reservoirs in container gardening, or you can let livestock do the crushing. And then as low-tech crushing methods, if you do want to further crush the larger bits, I highly recommend making or buying a soil tamper, like one that could also be used for earthbag shelters, Adobe method, or use a heavy-duty lawn roller, ideally one that's made from steel. Here's a way of using large parts of biochar in a greywater filtration system from a shower, whereas I call it a shower to soil system. So I have a drainage pipe coming out of the shower basin that's wrapped in geotextile. This drainage pipe has holes in it, of course, for the water to escape. And then it's falling onto a bed of biochar, which is sloped a bit backwards to the left. You cannot see the picture, but it's sloping downside. So the water that's then draining from the shower is able to soak up that biochar, and then the biochar offers some water retention. And I planted this out with sugarcane on the left and vetiver on the front. And vetiver is an excellent grass that's mainly used for soil erosion stabilization, because they have an incredibly deep root system. Their roots can go to 7 meters deep in some cases. And then on the picture on the right, you can see this system is about 5 months after it's been installed. You can see that the sugarcane is growing quite nicely, and the vetiver as well has developed very good. Then here is a grease trap plus pre-filter for the kitchen sink to soil system. So the black container on the left is the grease trap that traps the grease that floats to the top. The water exits the container on the bottom there, then is filtered through this large container full of very chunky biochar. And the filtered water at the top is then allowed to exit the system via this elbow pipe. And unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of this with the plants in place, because this I planted with mint, and I had some Phalaris arundinacea in there as well, which is a wetland type grass, which I think you guys have growing in UK as well, quite prolifically. And those plants were doing amazing, just growing in pure biochar chunks, being fed with the wastewater from the kitchen sink.
Wow.
And then here is in the water reservoir and container gardening. On the right side is a bathtub, which is a wicking bed, which is a system I've also experimented with quite a bit here in Portugal, because water saving is a big issue here with drought conditions. So we want to reduce all the evaporation as much as possible. And a great way to do that is growing in containers that are fed from the bottom, where you don't have surface evaporation. And as my developments developed over the years, I started putting more and more biochar in those systems because a lot of people either put gravel at the base. Of course, gravel doesn't hold much water. At the beginning, I was putting just pure sand, which already holds a lot more water than gravel, but not nearly as much as putting loads and amounts of biochar in there. And an added benefit of the biochar is that it can also capture some of the nutrients as they want to reach out in the winter when you do get rains and the baths might overflow a bit. So it kind of filters the effluent if they overflow. And then on the left is a normal container made from a large truck tire, which I kept one of the side walls on, which then creates a donut-shaped well to hold water. And then the large center hole I also filled completely with biochar to prevent any runoff if they do overflow. To capture those nutrients so they stay contained. And then lastly, I was a big fan of using deep litter composting. That's a system whereby you, instead of knocking out the animal pen every week or every couple of days, you just allow a large, you allow their bedding to just build up. And you keep adding organic material and carbon-rich material to balance out their high nitrogen manure. And in Portugal, it can be quite challenging to find large amounts of wood chips or woody biomass in general. And because of that, it also really helps to add biochar there, because the biochar neutralizes their high nitrogen output much more and much longer term than wood chips alone would do. And this was for me sufficient to completely eliminate all smells from the ducks. Even though in winter it would sometimes get a bit muddy, it all stayed proper hygienic. And the compost that resulted from this system was absolutely the best compost I ever made, quite frankly. And I was just throwing this in by the bucket loads or sometimes whole wheelbarrows at a time. And the ducks really loved the stuff. They would go for it, they would packet it. And as you can see in the bottom right picture, it's just their resulting poop, which was sometimes completely black, and it just wouldn't smell. The poop had zero smell to it at all. And the ducks were all very happy. They're laying lots of eggs, so they seem to be thriving on having lots of biochar available at their choice. And here's an example of a soil damper. On the left is something that was found here. Not sure what they originally used it for. And then this started to fall apart and rot at certain points. So I made one from steel from a small gas cylinder, like a camping gas container. And this works quite well on crushing biochar on a small scale. So I would crush this often, put it inside a woven bag, like an old feed bag or something. Give it a couple of blows with the crusher, then run it through a screen of my choice, typically holes about 3 millimeters. Then any parts that were too big, I would just return to the bag, crush again, and then rinse and repeat until all the biochar was crushed to the consistency of my liking. So then a bit about our products and services. So obviously we make biochar. Besides biochar, we also started producing wood vinegar. We're hosting workshops and offering private burns for people that have lots of biomass and they want to get rid of it and still retain some value out of it, and also want to learn how to make biochar themselves. We make flame cap kilns if people are interested in buying those. You can make their own biochar. We make smoked black salt, which is salt that we smoked between brackets because we don't literally smoke it, but we use our wood vinegar to smoke the salt. And we add biochar as well to the black color. Then we have vetiver plants, Californian white sage. A big issue with Californian white sage is that it's a plant that's threatened by over-harvesting in their native environment. and it's basically being poached. Like people head into the wild there with large backpacks, just on a mission to grab as much white sage as they can grab, just to feed the global market for smudge sticks. And here in Portugal, we have the perfect climate for growing these plants. So I started propagating those and selling them because nobody else had them available here. And then we have the digital towns. So here's some pictures of biochar. We offer biochar for use in the garden. We have various grades. We have a very finely ground powder that people can use also in lawns, where they can just allow it to mix in with their aeration equipment. And then we have a more chunky mix for tree planting, vegetable gardens. We offer biochar for pets that they can use as a supplement, detoxify. And then we have a very fine grain biochar made from hemp, the inner stalk of the hemp, which we sell for as a tooth powder, which we also use ourselves to clean our teeth. And we use hemp for this because it's less abrasive than most other charcoal tooth powders that are on the market. Activated charcoal, for example, is often made from coconut shell, and it tends to be a bit more hard on a microscopic level. And some pictures of me selling wood vinegar at a local garden fair. This was during private burn. I was teaching a team of an organic farm how to make biochar. I could get started with that. Right, another picture of the private burn. Flame cup kilns we currently have available. Some pictures of smoked salt. A picture of the smoked salt and some eggs. It gives a nice contrast to a dish. So it adds flavor and it looks nice.
Wow. Does it go that color just by adding the vinegar to the salts?
No, we also add some biochar to it. We add some of the hemp biochar, and that gives it a color.
Okay. So it's like what, 50% biochar, 50% salt?
No, it's actually written on the label. It's 0.7% biochar. So it's only only a very small amount. But because the biochar is so finely ground, it manages to cover all the salt and still give a significant impact on the color.
It's such a good point. That like, why does nobody eat biochar at any level here? Like everyone was really shocked at a festival this summer. Last summer I went to see these biochar breads. You can put it in bread, and
you can put it in just about anything. You can put it in pasta. You can put it in like really everything.
Incredible.
And the salt does really well at markets. Like it's a great opener. Like if people just pass by, ask, would you like to try some smoked salt? And smoked salt, I've never heard of that. And then they try it, they often buy it, and then that also gets the conversation going. And they might learn a thing or two about the other products as well. Whereas otherwise they would just walk by. It's a great conversation starter for us, this product.
Brilliant.
And the salt is also, it's locally harvested here in the Algarve. And it's hand harvested, not on a massive scale. So it's a local product. I'm quite happy to have that. And then the vetiver, these are pictures that the client sends, where he's using it for some soil stabilization on terraces. And this is, I think, was less than 6 months after being planted. I'm guessing by now these plants are probably 1.5 meters high, maybe 2 meters high even. And they're great at stabilizing the soil to prevent erosion. Then if you're close enough to the water table, that can also help pull some of that moisture up and make it available for other plants. And the amazing thing about this plant is that it's super drought tolerant, but at the same time also tolerates water logging. So if you have very heavy clay soil and you get like massive puddles in winter, it will still tolerate those conditions as well. And it's so tolerant of water that you can put it inside a pond and it will do well also. So it's drought tolerant and can live in a pond. So it's a very resilient type of grass. And it's sterile, so it's not invasive. Here in Portugal, we have quite some issues with invasive grasses that propagate and end up everywhere. And then here's a picture of the California white sage, which also for this climate here is absolutely perfect. But on the picture on the right, you can see that it's a gabion cage with in the center is a column of a very sand-rich soil. So the water retention in the soil is very, very low. And I would water this like 2-3 times in the summer, and that was it. And it would just thrive under those conditions. And the bees absolutely love it. These flower spikes, they go up about 2 meters. And they flower after the normal sages are done flowering. That really extends the pollen season for the bees as well. And then finally, we have the digital downloads, which is on the left of our indoor biochar peanut gasifier. And so this contains the indoor system, it contains instructions to build the triangular base, has information about the hot water heat exchanger as well. That's really all you need to know to start making your own little indoor biochar stove. And the heat output of this system, it's perfect for if you have a van or tiny house or personal spaces, or just for supplemental heating in larger spaces as well. And then we also have a wicking bed building guide with all the instructions of how we will build our wicking beds. And that's a collection of, I think, 4 or 5 different builds. So where you can see with different containers, with bathtubs, with truck tires, with normal buckets. I just have to say that here in Portugal, we don't get significant amounts of frost. So my wicking beds are built without a drain. So I cannot drain the reservoir in the winter because here there's no need to. So for people in the UK, they would have to include a drain as well, because you don't want the system to start freezing in the winter, of course. That's about it, really. And then, the current development. So at the moment, we're still working to improve the wood vinegar system. There's been another thing of lots of trial and error and trying things and burning things down because it got a little bit too hot, having issues with insulation and stuff. So we're still busy working on that. We want to bring a physical T-Log gasifier on the market. So that's this one on the left. We're going to focus on just the burner with a base, but we're still working on finalizing the base to get a bit more appealing version of that. Maybe with an integrated spot stand or something like that. And something I would like to achieve this year is starting to do some alcohol distillation using the T-Log gasifier as well. So we can start bringing some carbon negative tinctures on the market, which I think quite well as well. And then lastly, I want to try and make a T-Log powered forge to be able to start melting aluminium and maybe even copper, and make some functional items with that, just to show what is possible with the T-Log gasifiers and how big the heat output is and how hot the stoves actually burn, just as a proof of concept, really. That's about it.
Amazing. Oh my goodness. Oh man, thank you so much. That was absolutely amazing, dude. Yeah. Questions. I mean, I've got loads. I'm sure others have too.
Shoot.
Yeah, I mean, so Martin, we make a lot of hydrosols in our little world. We distill like plants to make hydrosols and then use them to flavor kombucha. Like, I have, I put a I put various stills on biochar heat before, and I've had some success, but I need more consistency over a longer period of time. I mean, something like what Brian's rocket with a pocket, where you can just pyrolyze the end of sticks and sort of keep feeding them in. I don't know if you've seen that design, but something that
Yeah,
doesn't have
yeah, I've seen. Yeah, yeah.
a batch ending to it. Like because the all of the fit systems I've got are quite crude compared to yours amazing like refined ones, and they all have a sort of, and they get like they're like quite hot, really hot, and then they're finished. You know,
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
I
Well,
need to
well,
get.
that's one thing. Let me go back a bit. Yeah. With the triple base that I have, if I start one burner at one point and then let's say wait 10 minutes before I start the next burner, and then wait another 10 minutes before I start the third burner, then you can get like a sequence going where the heat output stays more or less consistent over the whole period. And you just swap out one burner at a time, basically.
Yeah, that's it. That's the way to do it, isn't it?
But it's still because this 1 liter burner only burns for like 52 minutes. So you still like you have to keep reloading them. But they're quite easy to reload, which I've actually been doing this today. To reload, you empty them in another container, which you then snuff, or you put them in a bucket of water or something, and you can directly fill them again with new stove pellets. And then you can actually put part of the biochar you just thrown out. Well, not if you put it in water, of course, but if you don't put it in water, you can put part of the biochar back on top and then place it back on top of the base, and it starts burning within like 2-3 minutes. It has a proper flame again. So it's a very quick way to cycle the same burner and get more consistency out of it.
Okay, cool. And then do you just those handles, do you still need fire gloves because of the way you've designed that, or
In this way at the moment, not. Depends. If you put a pot on top, then you might need to have like a normal leather glove or something, because then more heat is reflected downwards. But yeah, I'm using just normal leather gloves, like very thin-skinned leather gloves to handle them.
kind of thing? Okay.
Because the handle here is stainless steel. It's just a piece of conduit, and because it's hollow, it heats up a little, but then it starts creating its own airflow, so it's basically self-cooling. But you can also put like a little wooden handle there instead of a steel tube. I have some other burners that now have wooden handles, and that also works. And those you can just handle without any gloves, just with bare hands. It's fine.
Cool, amazing. And Martin, I'd like kind of would like to share your website with people. Would you put it in the comments or maybe even like take us to it quickly so we can
Yes.
see how to sort of support your work? Because it's
Let's see. Just put my
any other questions from the audience, please don't hesitate to like put your videos on, and we've got a good half an hour now to ask Martin questions. I know Bono had some um regarding your ecosystem restoration project, Bono. Because I think what's so cool about what you're doing is like you're literally creating climate resilience in your area with this material and this.
Exactly. And also like what I'm doing now, and this is a bit different than what you guys are doing with all the compost and stuff. In a lot of areas, when I'm expanding the vegetable garden, I'm just adding a huge amount of biochar, raw biochar, not inoculated, not loaded with any nutrients, just a huge amount of biochar, mix it into the clay soil, and then use the fertility afterwards, like liquid manure or liquid fertilizer preparations. And then I can just take soil that is literally unfit for growing anything, but just some very strong weeds. All of a sudden, it becomes almost like a loam-like consistency. in the
So you're
space of a few
really
weeks.
using the biochar as a physical input to build the water retention capacity of the soil, and then you.
Exactly, but not just water retention, because here in the heavy clay soil, it's also very important that the soil is able to drain well. Because in winter we have a situation where the soil is too dense and too sticky, and you can hardly even dig in it, and it sticks to everything. And the biochar really breaks up that heavy clay, allows it to both drain the excess water, but also retain enough water in the summer. It's like it completely changes the soil structure enormously.
Incredible. Incredible.
I
Hello,
don't know if you
got
I'm on a
Carol.
phone. Hi, I'm on a phone, and it's a bit weird because I'm not usually on a phone. That's really interesting, Martin, because I've been chucking it down on our garden soils as well down at the Eco Hub, and we have really thick clay.
Yeah.
We don't have so much the drought at the moment. It's too wet, but I've been using it in those too wet conditions. But we did have a drought for about 3 months last year, and it's worked really, really well. And I didn't inoculate it a lot. It just went down because we just didn't have time.
I think if you don't inoculate it, as long as you're aware that you put a large amount of raw biochar there, you can compensate with like also adding urine to the soil and diluted urine. Yeah. Just make sure that you know that there's a lack of
nutrients
of nutrients, and compensate for that with inputs. And it's all going to be fine. I think there's a lot of fear going around for people that say, you cannot use raw biochar, it's going to rob your soil of everything. But especially here in my context, of course, for you guys in the UK, it's going to be different. But here, the soil is so poor. There is zero available. There's no carbon in the soil. There's no available nitrogen in the soil. There is hardly any biology in the soil. So there's nothing really that the biochar can rob from the soil because it's not there yet. And by adding a large amount of biochar in one go, I till it into the soil. And then after that, I don't have to keep working the soil anymore.
So it's kind of like the last till you do, because a lot of people talk about in the regenerative movement, it's like we do one last till and we put all the good stuff in there, and then we don't have to till again. And so you put biochar, folding biochar into the soil, and
exactly. And if you add large enough quantities of biochar, then it can indeed be the last till. If you have smaller amounts available and you use less, then you have to keep working it into the soil, because the biochar works best in the soil, in the root zone. Personally, I don't agree with adding biochar on top of the soil, especially not in my climate here, because it doesn't seem to work its way down that much.
Okay, that's so interesting. I want to hold that one, because there's an awesome group here, Martin Earthly, who are now doing a project with saving the ash tree, and they're applying biochar on top of trees, like as a mulch kind of thing. And it's a science project. It'd be great to know your perspective on that. Like how should, if we have you got ash dieback in Portugal? Do you have ash trees?
I don't think we've got ash trees.
No,
not in the south. Not in the south here. I think maybe further up north is possible, but here in the south, I don't think we have them.
Well, we're at risk of losing like 95% of our ash trees, which are like the tree of life to this landscape. And biochar has proven really positive, and they're helping pioneer this project to get as much biochar onto trees to sort of, to see if it can mitigate the loss. And it'd be interesting to get your perspective. If you from what you've learned about biochar, if they be digging it in. I mean, you can't really dig in around a tree's root trunk zone itself.
There are ways to do that. There's injection systems that use compressed air it's also used even before biochar was a thing. There were already people doing this to inject nutrients and to just loosen up the soil from existing trees by injecting lots of air in multiple spots to break up whatever compaction is going on. And that's also a way where you can get biochar deeper into the soil with injection systems.
Wow, amazing.
I think there's one company called Vox Geo Injectors or something like that.
I saw an advert for it actually. There is a big thing. You never know what to make of those kind of adverts, but that is potentially yeah, the
No,
way.
it looks quite legit, and I think that that's a way to go at it. But of course, that requires large equipment, and it's not something that's easily scalable.
Mm. Brian
Of course,
has had his hand up for a while. I'm going to pass the mic to Brian. Cheers, Brian.
Yes, Martin, can you tell me a little bit more about wood vinegar? That would be something I'd be very, very interested in. What's in it, or what's the chemical composition of it, and what can you do with it? It's of a.
I wish I could tell you exactly what is in it, but the thing is, wood vinegar. I'm not sure if I'm still sharing my screen.
You are. We've got that. That's brilliant.
Okay, so yeah, wood vinegar contains over 200 different organic compounds, and of course, this is going to vary a lot depending on what you make the wood vinegar from. So for example, if you have a wood vinegar made from bamboo or any other like grass or plant that is high in silica, then the wood vinegar is going to be higher in silica as well. And so it's called a vinegar, even though it's not a fermented vinegar, because it does have a high acetic acid content. And so the pH is also quite low. It's typically is between 2.5 and 4. So yeah, it's you can use it for so many things, and this is also, I think, something that's largely unexplored. And the knowledge that's out there at the moment on wood vinegar is mostly locked away in Asia. So we don't here in the West have that much access to it, because I know in Indonesia, for example, quite a few people producing the stuff. Japan makes it, other Asian countries as well. It's been a farm input for many years there. So you can use it as a growth stimulant, as a germination aid. It's a pest repellent as well. And it's antifungal, antibacterial, and if you use it in stronger concentrations, you can even completely sterilize the soil with it, if that would be needed for whatever reason. And then aside from that, I've seen research that it vastly increases the efficiency of chemical fertilizers and even conventional pesticides and herbicides, which of course are not things that we like to encourage the use of. But it's interesting that the wood vinegar seems to enhance the properties of other things as well.
Wow. And you can make that as a byproduct of you can make that with the charcoal making process, and you could capture the heat, so you could get 3 products from one. Is that right?
Exactly. Well, capturing the heat inside a wood vinegar system gets a bit more complicated, because you use most of the heat to make the smoke that you make the wood vinegar from.
Yeah.
But yeah, it can all be combined. And personally, I like my focus is always to be as efficient as possible. So I don't like burning any biomass down to ashes. So my wood vinegar system is powered by my Kiln gasifiers. So either the small triple burner or the large 20-liter gasifier. So I use that as my heat source.
Yeah.
And with that, I heat a retort, and then the smoke that comes out of that retort is being fed through a condensation system. And then there's a small amount of remaining volatile components that cannot be condensed, and those can be fed back into the retort as well to contribute to the heating of the retort.
So clever. Martin, I'd love to ask you as well, like I once was asked to make a water filter for a friend. You know, charcoal is a great water filter.
Yeah.
And I read a study that said you can boil charcoal 3 times. It's either hydrochloric acid or boiling it. And I sort of boiled this crushed charcoal 3 times using the heat from making more charcoal, and it just felt and yeah, I just you know, the water filter kind of works. But
I'm sure it will work. And personally, I'm not entirely sure that the boiling process is strictly necessary.
Really?
Because with the boiling, what you're doing essentially is you're activating it, because that's what
Yes.
activated charcoal is. It's the porosity is further increased, and it increases the absorption capacity of the charcoal.
Yeah,
But
the cation exchange capacity, is that it?
it's more the internal surface area. But the
Okay.
thing is, if you're not restricted by space, then you don't really need to go through that step, because you can just put more charcoal in a larger container and it's still going to do the filtration.
Okay.
And there's actually projects that make water filtration systems, and where they also include biochar. And as far as I'm aware, they don't go through that activation step. They just make the charcoal, they put it in the system, and they know that a certain quantity of charcoal is good to filter the water for a certain period of time or for a certain amount of liters. And at the end of that cycle, the charcoal is renewed, and they put new charcoal in the system. The old charcoal get either burned to burn some of those contaminations out of it again, or maybe used directly in the soil.
Okay, cool. So I guess,
And
yeah, because the main thing you've got to make sure is you're not getting too high volatile organic compounds left, isn't it? So you've got to make it at the right temperature, right?
exactly. Just burn it at the hot enough temperature. Make sure there's no more. Like,
And would you say, what would you say the minimum temperature is for making a biochar that's worth putting into the soil?
Well, that's a quite controversial topic.
Yeah.
There's I see so many articles coming out and studies, and they say, we studied biochar, and we studied biochar made at 350 degrees Celsius. And then I'm thinking to myself, is that really biochar, or is that just charcoal? Because at 350 degrees Celsius, in my opinion, you're not nearly getting all the volatiles out there.
Yeah.
Because it's a very low temperature. So personally, I would say the bare minimum would be 650, 700 degrees Celsius.
Wow, that's hot. Wow.
Yeah, but the thing is, in flame cap kilns, you easily reach that temperature, provided that you use the right type of feedstock. And that's something that I see a lot of people also, they make some mistakes there. They throw massive thick logs onto the flame cap kilns, and a thick log doesn't have that much surface area. So it's not going to produce that much heat. And more importantly, it's going to struggle to maintain that flame cap that you need to keep all the oxygen out. And for that reason, it makes much more sense to use much thinner types of wood on the flame cap kiln, and that's going to burn incredibly hot. And I've measured temperatures just over 1,000 degrees Celsius in flame cap kilns.
Wow. Can you do a flame cap kiln with wood chip? No, that's too fine. You can't.
And that is the big limitation of flame cap kilns. It's not suitable for stuff like wood chips. And if you're doing a flame cap kiln, you have small amounts of wood chips, and you throw in like a handful here, a handful there. Yeah, you can incorporate wood chips in a flame cap kiln, but you cannot run it exclusively on a flame cap kiln.
Okay.
And the risk is, if you throw too much of it on top, then you create like a cover and you're smothering the fire. And then
I know. I've tried to pyrolyze various things like oak sawdust and things like that. I can get a lot of that. That's too fine. I found to smolders and has really consistent burn speeds.
Stuff like that is more suitable for like a small retort in a wood stove, or maybe a small wood vinegar system. And even in those wood vinegar systems and larger retorts, you have to be careful that you don't pack them too dense, because you still need to have airflow on the inside of those.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Can I ask a question to Martin?
Yes, Bono, go for it.
Yes, Martin, I have a bit the problem that you showed in the beginning of your presentation. I'm having a farm in Andalusia, Spain, and I have a very old almond and olive tree forest, which needs a lot of maintenance. And I have a lot of cuttings at the moment that I cannot remove off my field, because we are not allowed to make a fire at this moment because it's too dry in that part of Spain. And I don't have
too dry at this time.
Yeah, it's still dry there. Yes, it's very, very dry. And I cannot, I don't have access in the way that I can get material there to how you call that in English, to mulch it, to make it in small bits and pieces. So my idea was, when I heard about a biochar, that this might be a very interesting solution to my problem in the future when I have like times of wet season, when I have the authority to burn down my cuttings.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's such a huge amount that what I saw in your presentations are, for me, this is all very new, but the name that you use is Kiln, yes. So I cannot imagine that I can get rid of my cuttings with this small sized knills. I need much bigger. I have a much bigger volume to process.
Well, so one thing to keep in mind is that as you make biochar from the biomass, it's going to reduce in size by about 50%. And then a large pile of biomass, let me see if I have some pictures. This is a good one. Like here you see a large pile of olive tree prunings. Like all the biomass you see in the picture, that all disappeared in a single burn. Because
in this knil in front of your picture, you can burn that in one day.
Yes, because the thing is, a large pile of biomass like this it's still mostly air, because it's never.
Yeah, sure. I understand. Okay.
So because it's mostly air and the biomass reducing by 50%, a large amount fits in a kiln.
Can I just add a question onto that, Bono? So I love your designs and seemingly like using old agricultural like buckets and things, like absolutely brilliant permanent designs. We have done, inspired by the University of YouTube, just 200-liter drums with the top cut off. I think it's about 35-centimeter piece cut out. A 200-liter drum on its side. Sometimes we've embedded it in the earth for like extra kind of insulation, and that seems to work as quite well. I more use it as my sort of waste flame cap kiln, like to get rid of the workshop offcuts and without putting too much time into it. But having watched your presentation, I want to put more time into preparing the wood so it's all the even size. But like, do you think that would be adequate, or do you think it would lack the properties for getting the heat up to plus 500-600?
Well, personally, I think that then a pit in the ground would be more suitable, especially if we're talking large quantities of biomass.
Right.
Because that, of course, depends if the soil is suitable for digging a large pit. Like as you saw the picture at the beginning of my presentation, here in many places you cannot even dig a massive pit. And you have to also be careful if the subsoil is rock. If it's like shale or a rock that contains water, you don't want rock starting to explode while you're doing a fire, which I've already happened a couple times. So you have to be careful with that. But if the soil allows you to dig a large hole and you do really have massive amounts of biomass, then making a pit burn is the most efficient way. And also one benefit of a pit burn over a metal kiln on top of the ground is that you can make the fire bigger than the actual hole itself, because you let it burn, you don't have to process it and cut it smaller, and as it burns you just push it further into the hole.
And do you top light it? So you'd make this pit and then you could get a big bonfire going, and like I've done in the past, you just get the fire going really nicely on top and just let it all burn down.
Yeah, you always light it on the top, because if you light a fire on the bottom, you get that whole column of heat going through the biomass, and that starts releasing volatile components, smoke, which is the fuel of your fire, outside of the reach of the flame. So they
Such a
always
big
have-
educational project here. Like everyone has bonfires and they all light it from the bottom and they all smoke like crazy and they all
Exactly.
everyone's air and it's just so crazy and it's just like, have you tried lighting it?
Exactly.
And
Yeah, well, can I ask something like when is it biochar and when is it becoming charcoal? Because I can understand that if you do it in a pit, you cannot control the heat in the way that you 100% sure you're for sure
Well,
that it's going to process into biochar, or is that
well,
something
that's a great question. And I would definitely say with the pit burn, you are reaching the temperatures that would qualify it as biochar.
okay?
And
So
in,
how they made pots and pans in the how you call it in English? Way back.
terra preta, the
The heat
clay.
is more than 1,000 degrees Celsius if you
Oh.
burn in a pit, probably.
Ah,
well, that's another thing. You also don't want to get too high in the temperature, because if you get much over 1,000 degrees, then you start to create more graphite-like structures, which
Ah.
then becomes less habitable for the microbes and the biology of the soil. So
Yeah.
the sweet spot is really like 700 degrees up to 900 or so.
Can you control it in a way? If you do it in a pit, can you have like a sensor or something to work with?
You can always use water, Bono, and you can have some buckets of water to hand and you can just extinguish it if it's getting too hot.
Okay. Okay.
Well, I don't think it really will get too hot. Like there might be parts of the fire where the fire itself reaches 1,000 degrees or over 1,000 degrees, but that's not necessarily the part where also the charcoal is located. So I would not say, I don't think that getting too hot would be an issue with the flame cap kiln and with that method. But you do have control over the temperature by the way you feed the fire. Like if you feed it with very loose branched material, very thin sticks and stuff, it's going to be hotter. If you give it a bit thicker material, like let's say 5-6 centimeters diameter sticks, then the temperature is going to drop a bit, because there's less active surface area involved in the fire at that time. So it's quite, there's a lot of ways to control the temperature of the fire.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And
I understand.
something else I would like to say, do you know anything about your fire restrictions in relation to barbecues? Like, are you allowed to have barbecues this time of the year?
Are you talking to me, Martin, in Spain?
Yes, yes.
We are not allowed any fire.
Not any fire. That's
No.
quite.
At the
quite
moment,
severe.
I have this farm now for 3 years, and in these 3 years, also my neighbors they warn me don't make a fire, and we actually need to have an authorization, and this authorization is only given in the month of January, February, March, and the rest of the year
Okay.
it's not allowed to have any open fire outside.
All right. That's quite more restrictive than here in Portugal then.
Yeah,
Because here the season is a bit longer, but yeah.
there's a lot of stress around that at the moment, because farmers are not able to get the cuttings of their lands. They are afraid of a fire that can occur, and they happen, like in Portugal.
Yeah.
We have many fires.
Yeah, it's a big issue.
It's so annoying because what we need is biochar everywhere to start, just to help.
Exactly, because
Water.
it would create an ecosystem there where the soil holds more water and more plants start growing. You get more resilience to
Yeah, I also saw those controlled fires that you have, like in in the United States. They have a lot of experience with controlled fire management, that they just start the fires controlled. They do it themselves, but they have a way of doing it in a way that it's completely
well, the conditions need to be right, the wind needs to be right, and of course the people need to be well trained in how to operate such a controlled fire.
Yeah, but sometimes a controlled fire can like actually prevent a real big fire. So that's
Well,
something that they don't understand yet in some parts of the world.
That's the thing in the Mediterranean climate here is actually dependent on fires. And lots of the tree species that are growing, especially here in Portugal, we got lots of pine trees, for example. They need that fire aspect to regenerate the forest. And you will see after a fire, a lot more young trees will start sprouting.
Yeah.
Because also then the seeds get exposed to the heat, the seeds get exposed to the smoke, which is basically the precursor of the wood vinegar. And this system needs to have regular fires. And if you have regular fires, you're always going to have smaller fires because the fuel doesn't build up. But since we do our best to prevent any fire, then you get a situation where you get such a massive buildup of fuel that if a fire does happen, then the fire goes out of control and you have a massive disaster because the fire is too big for what the system is designed for. And then the fire will actually start killing trees that would otherwise be protected from small fires.
Yeah.
Like pine trees, for example, they have such a thick bark because it protects them from those small fires that they're designed for. And it's same with cork trees, because cork, for example, is a very interesting thing. Cork, as far as I know, is the only material that actually expands and grows when you make biochar with it. So as a cork forest starts burning, the cork layer on the tree actually becomes bigger, and that it insulates the tree even more than it already did, and that protects the tree from the damage of the fire.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask a question about like it's so inspiring how you're making a living out of this, or like at least it's a really great hustle to try and make it work as a livelihood for you. And I was really inspired by your offering to go and do what did you call them, like you can do burns for people, so like as a service.
Yes.
You go and do a biochar burn because I mean we love doing the stack burners because they're such a lovely way of creating this source of heat and light that's just like better than more fire, and you manage them a bit and it's just like it's amazing, and then it finishes and it's loads of beautiful sparks and but I just wanted to ask a bit of a general question, like how is it what do you it's like how do you sort of monetize these things, like when you go to the markets, how much do you sell these little bottles of wood vinegar, how much it's hard to how much do you do a demonstration biochar for burn for, like what's the sort of economy of it?
Well, the wood vinegar starts at €5 for the small bottle I have here.
Yeah.
Our latest, it's 50 milliliters.
Yeah.
And of course, if you use it for germinating seeds and stuff, because the dilution is so large, you dilute it 1 to 200. So a small bottle is gonna last you quite long if you use it for germinating seeds. And we have larger bottles as well. We have a 250 ml bottle that goes for €12 at the moment.
Okay, cool.
Then we have a 750 milliliter bottle, which goes for €30 currently.
Yeah, and the price of char of your high grade char, do you sell that or do you just use?
Well, the tooth powder, for example, that's a bit more is more expensive compared to the one that goes into the soil, because a lot more work goes into it to make it, and it's made from hemp. The whole processing of it is more involved and more elaborate. We have to grind it in a different way. We have to screen it to make sure it's super fine. And that one goes for, we have 10-gram bags that goes for €9, and we have 5-gram jars that goes for €5. And
cool.
Then our smoked salt, for example, goes for, let's see, that. So the smoked salt is we have 100-gram pouches.
Yeah.
They go for €3. And then we have the 150-gram jar that is €5. And
Wow.
and this is something. This is like it's a great conversation starter. And often like people pass by and they seem completely uninterested. But
Yeah.
then if you ask, like, have you ever tried smoked salt?
I love that.
Smoked
You
salt.
get them by this
Yeah.
something they can experience rather than just some more information they don't know. Yeah.
Exactly. And then they try it and like, oh, this is nice. Yeah, I'll have one. Or no, I'll take three because they want to give some to their friends as well. So
Yeah.
that worked great at markets. Absolutely.
Brilliant. And your private biochar burns, are they like, I guess you do them various prices depending on what the budget of the person is.
No, they have a fixed price, but
Okay.
website. So we have the private burn.
And you can fit
Right.
the barrel in your car kind of thing and just take it to people and do it.
Yeah, that's the kiln we currently use. Actually, it fits in our car. It's not a huge car, but the kiln fits. And also the kiln is big enough. It makes a substantial amount of biochar. And I've had people that I made biochar for, and then I talk to them more than a year later, and they still say, I still have loads. Then I ask them, did you start making biochar yourself? And they say, no, because I still have loads from when you were here and made the biochar. So the big kiln we're currently using, the website, we need to update a bit.
So it's £300 plus travel. That's amazing. And then they get to keep biochar. You just take responsibility for it. Like you make sure, it's all safe and you've got like.
Exactly. And they keep all the biochar. So that's why the price is at that point as well.
So they supply the wood. So they have to, they have to have the dry.
Yeah. They need to supply the biomass. Because otherwise, also that's the thing with making biochar. If you start to have to move the biomass all over the place, then it becomes such a hassle. And that's why having a mobile kiln is also so important. And that's also a reason why having a kiln is more beneficial than always using a hole in the ground, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's say you have a farm that's a couple hectares. Then if you would have to dig so many holes to not have to drag all that biomass around, then it makes more sense to have a mobile kiln. And you can just take the kiln from pile to pile.
I'm interested.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Well, and I'm open to doing workshops in other countries as well. Obviously, I will not be able to take the kiln in the plane, but surely we will be able to find a solution for that. That's necessary.
Yeah, I mean, it could include making a kiln on site, couldn't it? It's just like we could just find the right kind of metal here, and you could come and make it.
Well, yeah. If you have the steel and you have a stick welder, then I can weld the kiln together, because I do all my own welding. So.
Real.
I have a quick question.
Who's that?
Jessica.
Yeah. Would you like to put your video on?
Oh yeah.
Hello.
Awesome.
Welcome.
Hi. If we were thinking about using wood from pallets, do we have to be careful about whether they've been treated chemically? And also the same kind of question for Christmas trees that have been like sprayed a lot with pesticides. Would you need to worry about that?
All depends on what exactly they've been sprayed with.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, a lot of pesticides, and for example, glyphosate, for example, that completely disintegrates into its base components at a temperature less than 200 degrees Celsius. So that's not something where you would have to worry about that. If it's a chemical that contains like arsenic, yeah, then we have to be careful, and we should not be using that to make biochar for growing food, for example.
Okay.
But when it comes to pellets, I'm not sure how it is in the UK, but here in Portugal.
I'm in the Netherlands.
You're in the Netherlands, which I guess would be similar to here in Portugal as well.
Yeah.
Because here in Portugal, I've handled definitely a few hundreds of pellets, and the amount of pellets I've encountered that have been treated with methyl bromide is literally like 2 or 3 pellets, because they've been phased out in like so many years ago. They've been banned in Europe that it's very difficult to encounter those.
They're mostly heat treated now, aren't they?
Yeah, all the pellets seem to be heat treated, and then of course you have to make sure you get it from a source where they don't spill any other chemicals on top of them. But personally, I would say that is also very rare. Most pellets I encounter, that they look clean, they don't look like stuff has been spilled onto them. And even if, for example, maybe you get pellets from like a car dealer or something, they have some motor oil that's spilled onto it. That's all stuff that's gonna completely burn in the heat of the fire as well.
Okay, thank
So
you.
that's definitely an input you can use. It's just that the nails can be a bit annoying. You have to.
On that vein, can I ask Martin, what's your thoughts on like a lot of the waste wood that one can acquire has often got like, you know, a bit of plywood, and even tiny amounts of MDF. I've had a bonfire, I've had a biochar fire with what I would not use in the soil. I used it as like aggregate biochar, like biochar that I was just gonna put into like, you know, underneath a pathway kind of thing rather than in contact with, because it was like way too much MDF. But like if I've got like 5% plywood bits and MDF, I might chop it up and add it to a burn that ends up in compost. Would you say that is like acceptable, or what? I mean, have you, because I mean, there's some people on the internet that are like, absolutely no, do not put that anywhere near your biochar. But at the same time, I'm thinking, well, with composting, microorganisms are going to make that into habitat regardless.
Well, I think a lot of the glues in plywood and stuff like that, they will burn also. They completely disintegrate into their base components.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Burn off. So, and you're talking about the structure being not conducive to fungal habitat, etc. But it's if it's as I don't know. My feeling is if it's under 5%, then it's going to, you know, that we can't throw away that, you know, where else is
Well,
that?
we have to put it somewhere. Like,
Exactly.
yeah, we can divert it all to landfill. But yeah, personally, for my private garden, I do sometimes include some plywood as well.
Mhm.
Because I burn everything so hot, and like when I do a flame cap burn, there is maybe just 1 or 2 handfuls of material that have not carbonized all the way through, and those are set aside and add to the next burn, and everything is fully carbonized. And for my private garden, I have no issues of including small amounts of such woods, because
Yeah.
like the fungi and everything that's gonna inoculate the char at some point is all gonna deal with it. And also any contamination that might be there, it's tightly bound into that carbon structure.
Yeah.
Because for them to even test the presence of certain things, they expose the biochar to all kinds of acids to make that extraction. And then we have to wonder if in nature those things would actually leach from the char, or if they just stay bound up in the charcoal itself.
Good point. Yeah. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Nev, Jack, Joanna, Elizabeth? No worries if not, but what not often you get to ask a question to someone that's knowledgeable about charcoal, about biochar.
I see someone just raised their hand.
Oh, cool. Where are they?
Joanna raised her hand,
Great.
just disappeared.
I'm just trying to unmute myself. I just wanted to know, are you beginning to have an impact on the farmers around you in them burning as well? Are you seeing a change in people's...
That's a difficult question. I try to not convince the local farmers here to change their ways, because a lot of them are more of the elderly generation. And it's not easy for people of a certain age to have to realize that the way they've been doing things for many, many years, and the way their fathers and grandfathers have been doing things, are not the best way to do things. So I just do my thing, and then yeah, if it inspires people, then that's great. But I'm not trying to convince people in particular.
You've got everything to make a kind of course here, like a crash course in biochar.
Yeah.
So good. You've got your own little school right here. I'd love to come and like help you make a course or something, because I know that you were saying you're not the kind of person that can video. Some of us, like, it's painful to have to like film ourselves as well as doing this work, isn't it? But honestly, like, what you're doing is so good, and it's so accessible, in many ways. You just, you do. I want you to have your biochar school, a module in a course, a curriculum that could just make this go further, because it's such good, accessible, influential work.
Thank you very much for your
Yes.
lovely compliments there.
Any other questions, everyone? If that's all, then I would just like to encourage everyone to join the biochar group on the forum, because that is like the most it's got the most engagement on the forum of all the groups, that in the mycology space with. And I'm looking to like upgrade the forum so we can have like moderators like Brian and Martin and the Earthly guys and Caroline. I'd love it if you would be moderators in the biochar space. And like, I realized that like kind of can't do this. You can't do a network it's greater than the sum of its parts on your own. I need to find a way of like structuring it so that it would incentivize you guys to use it too. And potentially if we can like get at the moment it's just a fledgling little like community, but if we could get lots of members, there could be a way that like they could benefit our different projects and our different livelihoods by a bit like YouTube, but on a smaller scale. Like the more engaged the more you put in, the more you get out. Basically, it can incentivize, it can work for us all. So I'm going to sort of like develop that idea and be in touch with people about that in different subjects, because I think that's the way it could really take off. And we're working on like educational tutorials, because it's actually really useful. If you just go on there now and just put in, I could do a whole talk. I think I'm going to save it for a separate video to focus on that. I'm sure I'm tired now, but like hashtags, just search the hashtags like that you're interested in, and you'll find some really great information that's been shared there over the last few years. So yeah, that's another chapter, but yes, do join the biochar group to keep in touch with Martin as well, hopefully. I hope to see you there, and I'll probably be sharing catching a lot of your biochar inspiration and putting it there regardless. But yes, thanks everyone. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you. Thank you as well for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Everyone, good evening. Good night.